Greensburg, Kansas was once defined by two things: the world's largest hand-dug well and a population slipping toward extinction. By 2007, this former boomtown was a stubborn holdout. Just a few hundred families clinging to old pioneer values as businesses shuttered and neighbors moved on. But beneath the pride in their colossal well and storied meteorite, a storm was brewing, both on the prairie and within the town itself. No one here imagined that disaster could force a choice that would put Greensburg's name on the map for a reason no one expected. Not tragedy, but transformation. How did the town that refused to die become America's greenest city? And what did it take to survive the wind that nearly erased it? Rail tracks first crossed the Kansas prairie here in the 1880s, carving out a new settlement that would soon call itself Greensburg. Like so many towns of the era, it was born from ambition. Railroad surveyors, merchants, and farmers staking their future on wheat and cattle, betting that water and grit could hold a community together. By 1888, townsfolk finished the Big Well, a hand-dug marvel 109 feet deep and 32 feet wide. That is basically a giant underground reservoir, dug with shovels and sweat, meant to supply the steam engines and fields around it. For generations, the Big Well wasn't just a utility, it was a symbol. School children toured its cool, echoing depths. Tourists paid a dime to peer down into darkness. It stood for ingenuity, perseverance, and the idea that a small town could do something big with its own hands. A few decades later, in 1949, a local farmer unearthed a 1,000-pound meteorite just outside of town. The meteorite, now displayed at the Big Well Museum, became another point of pride. A reminder that Greensburg sits not just on the prairie, but under the same sky that sent iron from space. These two icons, the well and the meteorite, became shorthand for what it meant to be from here. Practical, resourceful, a little bit stubborn, and always aware of forces bigger than yourself. As the decades rolled on, the population thinned. The railroad faded, and Main Street lost its shine. But for those who stayed, leaving wasn't just about jobs or houses. It was about family roots and the belief that thrift, stewardship, and self-reliance still mattered. In Greensburg, green never meant a political slogan. It meant patching a roof instead of buying new, saving rainwater, sharing what you had, and making do. Those values, pioneer conservation, not ideology, ran deeper than the well itself. They shaped the way people saw their town and themselves, even as the future grew uncertain. Bob Dixson, a lifelong Kansan, worked the land his parents and grandparents had farmed before him. For Bob, stewardship meant more than tending crops. It meant looking out for neighbors, fixing what could be fixed, and never wasting what might be needed tomorrow. Stacy Barnes, who would later help guide the city's recovery, grew up hearing stories about the Big Well and the meteorite. Reminders that Greensburg's survival depended on both grit and a sense of wonder. Pastor Jeff Blackburn, along with his daughter Cassie, led Sunday services that doubled as family gatherings, where the talk often circled back to hope and responsibility. Ray Stegman, the county's emergency manager, checked radios and weather bulletins with a habit born of hard lessons. Mary Sweet, running the local hospital, kept emergency plans up to date, knowing that in a town this size, every life counted. Each of them carried a version of Greensburg's unwritten code: use what you have, share what you can, and plan for lean years. These weren't just platitudes. They shaped every decision, from how to patch a barn roof to how to face a changing world. As Mary Sweet put it, you don't throw out what works, you make it last. Still, not everyone saw the future through the same lens. Down at the feed store, a skeptical voice, someone like Dennis McKinney or a longtime shopkeeper, could always be counted on to question the wisdom of new ideas. Green, around here that just means you're not ripe yet, he'd say, half joking, half serious. For him, thrift was about survival, not slogans or policy. On May afternoons, with the wind picking up and the sky turning unsettled, the talk shifted. Meteorologists out of Dodge City warned of a high-risk setup, but to locals, it was the kind of day that made you pay attention. Radios stayed on. Neighbors called neighbors. The question lingered. If trouble came, would old habits and watchfulness be enough? In Greensburg, warnings were never just background noise. They were a test of how well you knew your land, your people, and yourself. The irony was never far away. The same winds that threatened the town could someday power its lights. By 8:30 p.m. on May 4th, 2007, the sky over Kiowa County was already churning. National Weather Service radar near Dodge City picked up a supercell with the kind of rotation that makes meteorologists uneasy. Spotters along the county roads relayed the first visual warnings: a lowering cloud base, flashes of lightning, and a wall of wind building in the darkness. At 9:03 p.m., the tornado touched down south of Greensburg, still miles from the city limits, but moving with purpose. The initial tornado warning went out through NOAA weather radio and the emergency alert system, breaking into local broadcasts. Around 9:15 p.m., the sirens in Greensburg began their wail. Ordinarily, protocol called for a cycle or two, but this time, dispatchers, acting on Ray Stegman's direction, ordered the sirens to stay on, continuous and unbroken. Residents who had grown up with severe weather drills recognized the tone in the warnings. This was different. Meanwhile, KAKE-TV's Dave Freeman, live on air, abandoned the usual measured delivery. "If you are in Greensburg, you must take cover now," he pleaded, urgency rising with each update. Within minutes, the language from the National Weather Service escalated. The phrase tornado emergency replaced the standard warning, a term reserved for the most catastrophic scenarios. The alert spelled it out. A large destructive tornado was moving directly toward Greensburg. The warning included a chilling line: most of the town will be destroyed. For many, this was the first time they'd ever heard such explicit language from official sources. As the tornado closed in, redundancy became the rule. Sirens blared, radios crackled, televisions flashed emergency crawls, and neighbors called each other to confirm what they already knew. In some homes, the power flickered and died. In others, the last thing heard was the steady mechanical wail echoing through the wind. The hospital, under Mary Sweet's leadership, enacted its basement protocol. Patients and staff moved to interior rooms, the result of years of preparedness. At the dispatch center Tasser, the phones rang non-stop. Amid the chaos, dispatcher Toshia Hoover missed one take cover call, her line tangled with overlapping emergencies. By 9:40 p.m., spotters reported a wedge, tornado jargon for a funnel wider than it is tall. Doppler radar confirmed what few could see in the dark. This was not an ordinary tornado. The wind field stretched nearly 1.7 miles across, with peak winds later measured at 205 miles per hour. The last warnings repeated on every channel. This is a life-threatening situation. At 9:45 p.m., the tornado entered Greensburg. Homes and businesses, some standing for generations, vanished in seconds. The Big Well's stone entrance was swept away. Vehicles became projectiles. For 62 minutes, the storm carved a path of destruction, leaving 95% of the town in ruins. Yet even as walls collapsed and power lines snapped, the earlier decisions, continuous sirens, relentless alerts, clear broadcaster calls, proved decisive. 11 lives were lost, but in a town nearly erased from the map, dozens of families survived because they heard, believed, and acted on the warnings. The question was no longer whether the town would survive the night, but what would be left to rebuild at dawn. In the span of a single hour, Greensburg became a place defined by basements, faith, and the choices people made in the dark. Pastor Jeff Blackburn, his wife, and their daughter Cassie huddled together in their basement, the air thick with dust and the weight of prayers. Cassie later remembered the silence right before impact, how the pressure seemed to squeeze the breath from her lungs, how her father's voice steadied her as the world above them came apart. Walls shuddered, glass burst somewhere overhead, and then the storm pressed down so hard it felt like the earth itself was folding. When the noise faded, their house was gone, but all three were alive, clinging to each other in the hollowed-out remains of their home. Across town, Bob and Ann Dixon lost nearly everything. Their house vanished, leaving only a slab and a scatter of memories. In the days that followed, Bob found a scrap of wood and painted a simple message: "Future home of." He planted the sign in the rubble, not as a boast, but as a promise to his family and neighbors that hope would outlast the storm. That sign became a landmark before any building rose again, a statement that the people who stayed would not be defined by what they lost, but by what they chose to rebuild. At Kiowa County Memorial Hospital, Mary Sweet ran through the checklist she'd practiced every spring. Staff moved patients, some still hooked to IVs, into the basement and interior corridors. The tornado collapsed the hospital's main structure, but every patient and nurse survived. Later, Mary would tell FEMA officials that drills and clear rolls saved lives that night. The hospital's survival wasn't luck. It was habit, discipline, and a refusal to take shortcuts with safety. In a downtown cafe, a handful of residents made a split-second decision as the sirens blared. Instead of running for their cars, they crowded into the walk-in cooler, wedging themselves between boxes of produce and metal shelves. The tornado hit with such force that the building above them dissolved, but the heavy cooler held. When they emerged, they stepped into a landscape stripped bare, alive because they'd chosen shelter over panic. Kendall Smith was 10 years old, terrified and shaking in his family's basement. Later, he would draw tornadoes in his school notebooks, not out of fear, but fascination. That night planted a question in him. How does a storm become a monster? Years later, Kendall would return to Greensburg as a meteorologist, determined to make sense of the chaos that shaped his childhood. Not every story ended in survival. Officer Tim Buckman, responding to calls and trying to warn residents, was struck by debris while on duty. He died serving others, his loss mourned by family and the entire county. In the weeks after, his badge and uniform were carried into the church sanctuary, a reminder of sacrifice and the bonds that hold a community together. At the dispatch center, Toshia Hoover juggled a dozen emergencies at once. Amid the chaos, she missed the take cover call for her own family. The guilt lingered, even though the warnings had already reached most homes. Her story became a lesson. No system is perfect, but redundancy saves lives. By dawn, the scale of loss was plain. 11 people, 10 in town, 1 in the countryside, had died. But in a city nearly erased from the map, the number was far lower than anyone expected. Dozens survived because they heard the warnings, believed them, and acted. In basements, coolers, and hospital corridors, choices made in minutes gave Greensburg a chance to choose again at sunrise. The storm had passed, but the hardest decisions were only beginning. Dawn revealed a landscape almost beyond recognition. The grid of streets and landmarks that once organized daily life had vanished under tangled debris and raw earth. Without street signs or familiar rooftops, even longtime residents struggled to know where they stood. Piles of shattered lumber and twisted metal stretched for blocks, hiding hazards beneath every step. Ruptured gas lines hissed in the open air, and the sharp smell of spilled chemicals hung over the ruins. Fires smoldered where transformers had blown, and the wind scattered insulation like snow across the fields. Emergency crews worked by sound and memory, calling out names as they searched for anyone trapped beneath the rubble. The Kansas National Guard arrived in convoys, fanning out to secure the perimeter and clear routes for ambulances. Red Cross teams set up triage tents on bare concrete, handing out blankets and bottled water to survivors who stumbled in, dazed and bleeding. AmeriCorps volunteers, Over 7,600 would register in the coming days, formed bucket brigades, pulling debris by hand in places too narrow for heavy machinery. With power out and cell towers down, handwritten notes and word of mouth became the main lines of communication. The first task was a systematic search, house by house, lot by lot. Search and rescue teams, some from as far as Wichita and Oklahoma, rotated in 12-hour shifts. They marked each address with spray paint, a circle for clear, an X for found, numbers for how many searched or rescued. The doctrine for these grid searches changed on the fly, adapting to a town where basements were often the only thing left. Lessons learned here would later be written into Kansas emergency protocols. Hazards multiplied with every hour. Propane tanks vented into the air, and standing water mixed with sewage in the low spots. The hospital, though standing only in fragments, became a rally point for both the injured and the unaccounted for. The city's emergency manager, Ray Stegman, coordinated with state officials, relaying needs for equipment and medical aid. By noon, the parking lot outside the hospital filled with ambulances, generators, and pallets of supplies. An improvised logistics hub in a town without walls. The shock was total, but the response was relentless. Volunteers slept in church basements or on cots in the open air, refusing to leave until every name on the list was checked off. For the first time since the storm, the question shifted from survival to the next step. What would it mean to rebuild when nothing familiar remained? 3 days after the tornado, a battered stretch of concrete outside the hospital became the city's makeshift council chamber. Folding chairs circled up on asphalt, still stained with mud, and the only shelter was a tent borrowed from the Red Cross. Steve Hewitt, the city administrator, laid out the first copies of the FEMA Long-Term Community Recovery Plan, pages flapping in the prairie wind, promising a roadmap but offering no guarantees. Council members, some in borrowed clothes, others with dust still in their hair, faced a question bigger than any ordinance. Do you rebuild a town that's been wiped off the map, or do you walk away? The debate was raw. Some argued for caution. Tax rolls were gutted, insurance claims tangled, and the cost of starting over looked almost impossible. Others, like Hewitt, pushed for a different kind of future, one that would honor the old values of thrift and stewardship with new tools. The phrase, "put the green in Greensburg," echoed from Governor Sebelius's recent visit, but the meaning was up for grabs. For some, it sounded like an outside slogan. For others, it was a challenge to make the town last by building smarter, not just bigger. As the meeting stretched on, the idea of a mandate surfaced. Not just any rebuild, but a commitment. Every new city building over 4,000 square feet would meet the highest green standard, LEED Platinum certification. That is basically a rigorous national benchmark for energy efficiency and environmental design. The proposal included a target: cut energy use by at least 42% compared to what was lost. Some in the circle worried about the price tag. Early estimates showed a 20 to 30% premium up front. Others countered that the long-term savings on power, water, and maintenance would pay dividends for decades. The council pored over notes, weighed the risk of being first, and listened to voices from the crowd. Some hopeful, some skeptical, all exhausted. The vote came as daylight faded. One by one, hands went up, and the decision was made. Greensburg would not just return, it would lead. The ordinance passed, making the town the first in America to require LEED Platinum for all new city buildings above the threshold. The FEMA plan was adopted, setting the stage for a rebuild that would test every promise made in that parking lot. In the silence that followed, the stakes were clear. Greensburg had chosen a path that would demand patience, ingenuity, and faith that the wind that destroyed them could also power what came next. Blueprints and promises only matter if they turn into walls, roofs, and places where people gather. In Greensburg, That meant translating a bold ordinance into buildings that could stand as proof. Structures that worked harder, lasted longer, and cost less to run. The master plan, drawn up by architects at BNYM with input from the Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, became a checklist pinned to every project manager's clipboard. Daylighting, geothermal wells, thick building envelopes, universal safe rooms. None of it was theory anymore. Each idea had to survive the reality of budgets, schedules, and Kansas weather. City Hall went up first, using bricks salvaged from the old Main Street. The building's geothermal system pulls steady temperatures from deep underground, slashing heating and cooling bills by more than 70% compared to the past. Offices are lit mainly by sunlight, filtered through high-performance glass. Rainwater from the roof is collected and reused for landscaping. To anyone walking in, it feels both familiar and quietly radical, proof that thrift and innovation can share the same address. The new Kiowa County Memorial Hospital opened in 2010, designed to operate as the nation's first carbon-neutral critical access hospital. Its power comes from a mix of rooftop solar, wind, and high-efficiency systems that cut utility costs to a fraction of what the old hospital paid. Every room doubles as a safe space, and the entire structure is hardened to withstand the next tornado. For Mary Sweet and her staff, the building is more than a workplace. It's a promise that safety and economy don't have to be at odds. The K-12 school, rebuilt in the heart of downtown, became a rallying point for families and students who fought to keep it close to home. The building earned LEED Platinum status, with classrooms that open onto storm shelters big enough for the whole community. Students helped design the playground, and their advocacy kept the project from moving out to the highway. The school's energy bills are among the lowest in the state, and it stands as both a shelter and a symbol. Other projects followed. The BTI John Deere dealership became the first metal building in the world to earn LEED Platinum, proving that even heavy equipment sales could run on wind and sunlight. The 5.4.7 Art Center, named for the date of the tornado, was built by students and volunteers as a space for creativity and memory. The business incubator filled with startups, green jobs, tech services, and small-town entrepreneurs testing ideas that would have sounded far-fetched just a few years before. Each new building answered the same question. Could a town on the prairie lead the way in making conservation practical? The numbers spoke for themselves. Energy use down, operating costs down, comfort and safety up. For Greensburg, ambition didn't stay on paper. It became brick, glass, and steel. Proof that the wind that destroyed the town could help power its future. Wind turbines began spinning on the edge of town in late 2010, sending out a steady hum that was both new and strangely familiar. The 12.5 megawatt wind farm, tall white towers with blades longer than a semi-truck, now fed every streetlight, school, and business in Greensburg. For the first time, the town's power bills get stamped with a quiet boast: 100% renewable. That is basically all municipal electricity, every hour of every day, generated by the same prairie wind that once tore the city apart. The numbers looked impressive. Energy costs for city buildings dropped by more than $200,000 a year. Most months, the wind farm produced more than the town needed, selling the excess back to the grid. The savings helped pay for storm sirens, road repairs, and new trees along Main Street. For Bob Dixson, this was proof that conservation and common sense could work hand in hand. "We're not doing this to be trendy," he told a reporter. "We're doing it because it pencils out." But not everyone bought in without questions. Down at the co-op, a skeptical voice cut through the optimism. "You can't pay your mortgage with good intentions," one longtime resident grumbled. The upfront cost of building green, especially the LEED Platinum standards, ran 20 to 30% higher than a conventional rebuild. Homeowners and small business owners faced tough choices, weighing future savings against the reality of insurance checks that never seemed to stretch far enough. Some families packed up and left, saying the new Greensburg felt less like home and more like an experiment. The glare of national media didn't always help. Cameras from the Planet Green network arrived, chasing the story of the greenest city in America. Donations and grants followed, but so did a sense of being watched, judged, and sometimes misunderstood. There were days when the attention felt like a lifeline, and others when it felt like a burden. The council fielded complaints about rising taxes and slow business recovery. Some projects, pressed by budgets, fell short of their green ambitions. Not every building reached platinum. Not every promise paid off right away. Still, the wind kept blowing. Each month, the city posted energy reports in the local paper, listing kilowatt hours saved and dollars kept in town. For every skeptic, there was a neighbor who could point to a lower utility bill or a safer storm shelter. The debate never fully faded, but in Greensburg, the question shifted from whether green was possible to how much of it could last. The wind that once destroyed the town now paid for its lights, its future, and, sometimes, its second chances. Every spring, the sirens in Greensburg sound for the weekly test. 3 minutes of steady wail, just as they have since the town rebuilt. Kids in the elementary school file into the safe room, teachers counting heads by habit. At City Hall, Ray Stegman's old checklist still hangs near the radio, and emergency managers run through the drill. Warnings, shelter, accountability. In recent years, severe weather has brushed close. Hail, high winds, even a tornado warning or two. But the rebuilt systems have yet to face a storm like 2007. Even so, each alert is treated as the real thing. Doors swing open to shelters, text alerts light up phones, and the safe room at the hospital fills with patients and staff in minutes. The numbers tell part of the story. Since the rebuild, every public building in Greensburg has a hardened shelter space, and over 90% of homes have access to a basement or storm-rated room. Emergency protocols are practiced, not just posted. The cost of all this, reinforced walls, backup power, training, was steep at first, but the payoff is measured in quiet confidence. Insurance premiums for city buildings have dropped. Annual reports show a steady decline in weather-related injuries. What Greensburg learned is now shared far beyond Kansas. National agencies cite the town's approach as a model. Redundancy in warning systems, drills that become muscle memory, safe rooms as standard, not luxury. The lesson is simple, but hard-won. Preparedness is not a one-time fix, but a habit. In Greensburg, resilience is built into the routine, ready for whatever the sky brings next. Scientific teams arrived in Greensburg before the debris was even cleared, drawn by the scale of destruction and the rare opportunity to study an EF5 tornado's aftermath up close. Mobile Doppler radar units had tracked the storm for over an hour, capturing more than 70 minutes of wind data, one of the most complete data sets ever recorded for a tornado of this strength. That data, later analyzed by researchers like Joshua Werman, changed how meteorologists understand wind fields and damage patterns, and it shaped updates to the enhanced Fujita scale and national warning protocols. The phrase tornado emergency, first used in Greensburg, quickly became a standard, now recognized by every meteorologist and emergency manager in the country. Engineers and building scientists combed through the ruins, documenting how walls failed, what held, and where lives were saved by basements or reinforced rooms. Their findings influenced building codes across tornado-prone states, embedding lessons from Greensburg into new standards for safe rooms and shelter design. Delegations from as far as China and New Zealand came to see the rebuilt town, taking notes on wind-powered grids, storm-hardened schools, and the way a community could turn catastrophe into a laboratory for resilience. For locals, the term living laboratory became more than a slogan. Bob Dixson, Stacy Barnes, and Pastor Blackburn each spoke of the town as a place where every drill, every energy report, every new building was a test, one that others could learn from. Their stories, captured in journals and interviews, remind outsiders that Greensburg's influence doesn't come from perfection, but from a willingness to keep learning. In the words of Barnes, "We're not a finished product. We're proof that you can start over and keep asking what comes next." On May 4th, 2007, an EF5 tornado destroyed 95% of Greensburg, Kansas, claiming 11 lives and erasing nearly every landmark. In the first 72 hours, city leaders committed, by a recorded council ordinance, to rebuild all public buildings over 4,000 square feet to LEED Platinum standards, setting a first in the United States. Documents show this decision was rooted in local values of thrift and stewardship, not outside pressure. The town invested in a 12.5 megawatt wind farm, providing 100% renewable power for municipal needs. Yet, Greensburg's population never fully recovered, and some projects fell short of initial ambitions. Questions persist about long-term economic sustainability, and whether similar models can be replicated elsewhere. Still, federal reports confirm that new safe rooms, routine drills, and clear warning systems have saved lives in subsequent severe weather events. Greensburg stands as documented proof that survival depends not just on what is built, but on the choices a community makes together.